Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. Here in this jar, you can see I have a few tomato suckers. I just clipped these and I'm rooting them. And my goal with rooting them is, obviously my tomato plants need to be pruned because that increases airflow, prevents or at least slows down the spread of disease and just leads to a healthier plant overall. So especially if you live in a humid environment like I do, pruning your tomato plants to increase and maximize airflow is pretty important when it comes to maintaining the health of your plants. But as you can see, some of these suckers got away from me and they are pretty large and I don't really want to waste them. So we're gonna go take a look at some of the tomato plants I have growing and I will show you some different examples of suckers. I try to usually catch them when they're on the small side, and in that case I can just kind of pinch them out and discard them. But when some get away from me and they're big like this, or honestly sometimes I will even intentionally let a few get big, because these make the perfect way to just increase your tomato plants in the garden for free. And basically once this roots, I'm going to have a started seedling without the hassle of having to start seeds. So in this tomato plant here, this is how the suckers start. They're really tiny, and when they're like this, I just kind of pinch them and pull them right out and then just discard them. So basically a sucker will grow. You have your main stem here, and then you have the leaf branch. And it's not exactly a 90-degree angle, but from here to here roughly, and kind of usually in here at about a 45-degree angle, you'll get those suckers growing. And you can see I have a larger one up here. So this one might be a little bit small to root, but I could clip this and potentially root this, or I could clip it and just give the plant some airflow. What I want to do is look for a couple more suckers. For example, this one here this one's actually larger than I would really prefer. I can go ahead and let's try to find the base where that actually, so you can see here's the leaf branch and here is the sucker. If I clip this out, then I can root that and have another tomato plant. So my goal in the garden, which does not always happen, is to have tomato plants all the way up until frost. And this year my garden has been pretty behind, and so I feel like that goal is even more important. I want to make sure, since I'm getting such a late start on my tomato harvest, I want to make sure that I can keep it going as long as possible and still get a decent harvest of tomatoes over the course of the season. So I'm going to go ahead and clip that sucker. I'm going to go ahead and root it, and I think I want to root overall probably about 6 or 7 suckers. And we're just going to let them sit in the jar of water and grow roots, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do with them. So I'm just going to go in here and see how well I can do this with the camera. Just clip it down by the base. And let's see. Lost track of it some. Oh, here it is. So this is a Cherokee Purple tomato sucker, and we will go ahead and stick this in the jar along with our other tomato plants, or future tomato plants. Now you could also stick these directly in the soil if you wanted to, or stick them either in the ground or in a pot of soil, and they would root that way as well. I find that they root a little more easily in my experience. Now honestly, tomato plants, they root easily anyway because they're designed to root all along the stem. But I find that in my experience they root a little bit more quickly if I do it in water. So you could put them in a pot or directly in the ground, as I said. You would just want to, in that case, make sure that you keep that soil really moist until that tomato seedling has a chance to develop a good root system and really take root. So as I said, I'm going to go find a couple more suckers. I have 4 in here now. These are all large slicer tomatoes. I do want to find probably at least 2 cherry tomatoes as well because we have to keep that harvest going. So as I said, I'm going to end up with 6 or 7 suckers. I'm going to root them, and I'm going to meet you back here once they're rooted and show you where we're going to plant these for our succession crop of tomatoes. And this is a whole lot easier than starting seedlings. I'm just going to keep this jar of tomato suckers right out on my deck because I want to make sure that, these plants have been out. They've been out in nature, they've been out with the sunshine, the heat, the temperature fluctuations, the rain, everything. And I don't want to bring them inside and have them get unused to all of that. I don't want to have to go through the process of hardening them off again or anything like that. So they're just going to stay right here on the table on my deck until they're ready to plant. One thing I do want to mention about this sucker in particular here, you can see that this is flowering and has some buds. I do want to go ahead and pinch this off because I don't want this plant using its energy to produce fruit right now. I want it to use its energy to produce roots. And and once it is rooted and established, then we will let it flower and produce fruit. So it's been about a week and a half now, and these tomato suckers have been sitting in water. And take a look at all these roots that they've grown. So these are definitely ready to get in the ground. Now, these actually could have been planted out a couple days ago, so you wouldn't have to wait the full week and a half. I just have been busy and the weather hasn't been great the past couple days, so I haven't had a chance to get these planted yet. So today is the day. I actually want to get these planted in the ground before the root systems get too large. I find that if you let the root systems get too large, the transition from growing roots in water to growing roots in the ground can be just a little more challenging for the tomato plants to manage. You know, they will do it, they'll do it and they'll be fine, but I'm just going to get them planted as soon as possible, which right now is today. Now, you can do this with tomato plants because in nature, tomato plants naturally want to grow as a vine, creeping along the ground. And basically everywhere that the root touches when they grow unsupported crawling along the ground will grow roots and sink into the ground. And it's just the way that tomato plants are able to just have a really large root system and grow a really large plant. So we can take advantage of that quality that tomatoes have by clipping these suckers off, sticking them in the soil or sticking them in water, letting them grow roots, and then sticking them in the soil. This is a great shortcut to try to get fall tomatoes or, you know, a second harvest of tomatoes, because at this point in the season, you know, I have a little less than 100 days left until my last frost. You may have a different amount. You may have a shorter season or a longer season than I do. But when you look at a tomato packet and you see something like 80 days to maturity, that means 80 days until you get your fruit. The problem with that is that even though that sounds like I should be able to stick a tomato seed in the ground and get a fruit, tomatoes, when you see the days to maturity on the seed packet, they're actually counting not from when you start the seed, they're counting from when you transplant the started transplant out into the ground. And at that point, that transplant, they're assuming, will be about 6 to 8 weeks old, which means that I do not actually have time to start tomatoes from seed right now and get a harvest. But this gives me that 6 to 8 week head start. So this is now the equivalent of putting a well-started transplant into the ground as opposed to starting from seed. Gives me a nice little bonus without the hassle of having to start from seed, which I would have had to do a couple months ago. So we are going to stick the tomatoes right here into this patch. You can see I still have some garlic, which will be coming out soon, but some of my garlic has already come out. So you can see the elephant garlic that I had growing on this side is done and has come out. And over here, I have my regular hardneck garlic, which will be coming out really soon. So we'll be planting a few tomatoes here. And then when I initially planted this garlic, I did leave a strip along the back bare, and that's what we'll be using for our tomatoes. So by the time the tomato plants are really large and need to expand beyond this little narrow strip that I've given them, these garlic plants will be coming out of the ground. So because I'm going to be planting these tomato suckers in a place where I've already grown some vegetables this year, I want to make sure to amend this soil because it's kind of a good rule when it comes to succession planting. Basically, anytime you pull plants out and you're putting new plants in, you want to amend your soil, because the plants that were growing here before already took quite a bit of nutrients from the soil, and I want to make sure that these tomato suckers have the nutrients that they need to grow, especially since they're going to have to grow within a fairly short time if they're going to actually give me tomatoes before fall. So this is a little bit of a risk. This isn't a sure thing that I'll get tomatoes before fall. It kind of depends on my fall weather. But this is a risk that I think is definitely worth taking. I mean, it didn't cost me more than just a couple minutes it took me to clip off these suckers, which honestly I had to clip them off the plants anyway for better airflow. And I just stuck them in the water. So it's taking me a little bit of time investment. I'm going to put some compost down here where this garlic was growing, and then I'm just going to stick these in the ground. So it's basically a zero financial investment aside from a little bit of compost and a very minimal time investment. So I think that this is definitely worth the risk, and I will let you know as the season goes on if it pays off and if we do get fall tomatoes from these plants. So you can see I've got this beautiful blank canvas, or mostly blank canvas, of nice rich compost to work with. And we're just going to go ahead and stick these tomato suckers right into the soil. Now notice specifically with these suckers here, these rooted not just at the base, they rooted all along the stem. Everywhere that was touching the water has grown roots. So that tells me that these tomato plants, the deeper I plant them, the more extensive root system they will be able to develop. Just like in the spring when you're transplanting tomato transplants out into the garden and you want to plant them deeply to promote good root development, I want to do the same with these suckers here. So I'm going to plant these all the way up till here. For right now, I am going to keep this leaf here even though it's going to be right above the ground because the plant is so little, but as this plant grows larger, I'm going to come through and prune off all the leaves that are close to the ground. Also, because this soil is nice and loose, I don't have to worry about digging a giant hole for this tomato plant. All I have to do is basically just make a little mini hole in the ground that is as deep as this root system is, stick it in, and gently smooth the soil back around it. And it is just as simple as that. So I'm just going to go through the rest of these tomato suckers. I'm going to plant them just like I planted that one. I'm going to space them about 18 inches apart from each other just to give them space to grow. I'm also going to provide some sort of support for them. At this point, I mean, they're very small. They don't actually need support. But I want to have the support in place so that as soon as they are ready for support, they'll have it. I have these stakes lying around and one single tomato cage lying around. You know, at this point in the season, I'm just using whatever I have left that's not already in use. So here are our beautiful tomato suckers, nicely rooted, and they should, once they settle in, start growing really strong. So I'm just going to go ahead and water these tomato plants in. I'm going to go ahead and add the support system, even though, as I said, I won't be attaching the tomato plants to them yet. And then we're just going to let them grow. So I hope you will come back and join me. I will definitely be sharing updates on these tomato plants as they grow. And I really hope that we are able to get a successful fall harvest of tomatoes. Now, admittedly, I could have increased my chances of success with fall tomatoes by choosing specific varieties that mature really quickly. There are, especially determinate varieties, there are many out there that mature really quickly, and they would probably have given me a much larger harvest before frost. But I'm using the varieties that I have growing in my garden, and amongst those varieties, I did try to choose, some I chose just because they were my favorites. Some I did choose because they have a quicker maturity date. So I am hoping for a great, successful second harvest of tomatoes. And as I said, I hope you will come back and join me. I hope you're having a great day, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.